Hey everyone, welcome to session 103 of the Behavioral Observations Podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by the following. The University of Cincinnati Online. The UC Online program can be a rewarding way to advance your career, gain the cutting-edge knowledge and skills so you can help others while increasing your career options. For more information, check out behavioranalysisuc.online for more information. We're also brought to you by Behavior University, and their mission is to provide university-quality professional development for the busy behavior analyst. Learn about their CEU offerings and podcast-specific discounts over at behavioruniversity.com/observations. Go Lotus. Go Lotus is an easy-to-use, intuitive practice management platform. From scheduling to notes to data collection and more, they do it all, and with no contracts or obligations. Find out more about what they have to offer at golotus.com/register. And if you do sign up, tell them to use the coupon code MAT2019, and you'll get 25% off your first 3 months. Last but not least, Session 103 is brought to you by the ACT for High Functioning Autism workshop that's being held in Santa Ana, California on February 7th through 9th. Check out connections-behavior.com/events and look for the ACT for HFA event. And if it's something you want to attend, use the promo code podcast25 to save at checkout. Okay, on to today's show. What you're about to hear is my follow-up interview with Dr. Kim Berens from Fit Learning. I spoke with her way back in session 44, which went out in January of 2018. But this interview was conducted recently at the first annual Tate Behavioral Conference, which was held in Springfield, Massachusetts. As an aside, during the interview itself, I referenced our location as Springfield, New Hampshire, which was probably stuck in my mind because it's 2 towns over from where I live. But to be clear, this did take place in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, my oversight notwithstanding. But that aside, Kim and I covered a ton of ground in this podcast, and as you'll see, she doesn't hold back from sharing her opinions. In particular, we talk about her views on board certification of behavior analysts, and specifically why she let her certification lapse. We also talk about how Fit Learning is using mindfulness activities to improve learning in their students. And finally, we talk about her take on the American educational system. With regard to the latter, she referenced a book she has written on the subject. At the time of the conference, she was not able to disclose the title, but now I'm able to announce that the book will be called Blind Spots: What You Don't Know About American Education. I don't have a specific release date yet, but I think she's shooting for the book to be available sometime in the fall of 2020. And I will keep you up to date as soon as I learn more about that. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to thank the folks who made this all happen. And that's Christina Tatro and Kelly St. Clair and the rest of the awesome people at Tate Behavioral. They were awesome hosts, and they put on an amazing and informative event. When I was down in Springfield, I had a chance to meet many of their employees, and it seems like they've really developed a positive culture. To learn more about them, you can check out tatebehavioral.com. But let's get to this fun and informative interview. So without any further delay, let's hear from Dr. Kim Berens.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
All right, everyone, welcome to this live recorded edition of the Behavioral Observations Podcast here in Springfield, New Hampshire at the first annual Tate Behavioral Conference. Dr. Kim Berens, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. How you doing?
Good. Thank you so much.
So you just wrapped up. I tried to take notes furiously, and I think I had like 3 pages of notes of all the different things, and I don't even know where to begin. And obviously for those listening in their cars or at home or walking their dogs or whatever, they wouldn't have had the benefit. But I think we can perhaps kind of fill in the blanks throughout our conversation here. Some of these questions I'll ask maybe a follow-up to what we talked about, but some of them are going to talk about things in different directions that we haven't covered thus far. So, but the first place I think I'd like to go is, obviously we chatted on the podcast, I don't know, what is it, year and a half ago or something like that. So tell us what is new at Fit Learning. There's a couple different things going on, but just tell us kind of some of the new interesting things that you guys are doing at Fit. And one of the areas in particular I'd like you to talk about is the ACT and mindfulness piece of it. So if you can start by by talking about that would be great.
Okay, great. So there's always lots of new and exciting things happening at Fit Learning, I have to say, which is really fun and makes it such a privilege to work in this, be a part of this organization. But we are doing a lot of work in ACT. I have to say, Kendra Newsom and Donnie Newsom, who are, co-founders, and they run the Reno operation and an operation in Portland now. They really were kind of the catalysts for bringing ACT into our organization. I'm an RFT baby. I went to UNR. I stand on Steve's shoulders, every day. Same with my husband, Nick Berens. He was Steve's student. So we're very RFT based, and we've been driving the RFT based curriculum that we have in our organization for years. But I wasn't really an ACT. I never really went the ACT side of that. And so I will say, Donnie and Kendra have delved a lot into ACT, and really started piloting some pretty amazing things in the Reno lab around mindfulness with not only kids but with staff. So like they have a mindfulness team meeting where they start the meeting with a mindfulness exercise, and it's a really great way they build culture, and then they've been bringing in a lot of this work with kids as well, which is awesome because now, what's so fun about being part of this organization is, with working with such, ingenious humans, all this development occurs, and then we all get to benefit from it in all of the locations. So, one of the things that, Kendra and Donnie really started piloting was, we have kids that we're used to using direct acting contingencies with, right? Like directly reinforcing the behavior we want to occur, and then, more likely redirecting or not attending to, inappropriate behavior. But inside of that, that's not always going to work out, especially for some of our older kids. And we have a lot of adolescents, especially teenage boys and girls, who come into Fit after school, and they've got a lot of stuff going on in their lives. I mean, that's a tough age, right?
Probably a lot of pressure too, I think, for some of these kids.
Yes. I mean, the social pressures and being cool and not necessarily wanting to show up to a session and be self-expressed and like have someone giving you high fives and cheering you on in programs. I mean, that can be kind of embarrassing. And so, there's a lot of things that show up for, kind of neurotypical humans that you don't necessarily really think about if you're working with other kinds of populations. So they really started bringing in some of this work for kids who would shut down in sessions and have various barriers where, we're doing some mindfulness work, like just taking a moment, getting present to the session, the eyes closed exercise, other things that they do. And what's awesome is because of how we measure behavior and how we, analyze, behavior in the same way, they were really able to demonstrate functional relations between, decelerations in barrier behaviors during sessions with these kinds of kids and the implementation of a mindfulness activity just at the beginning of the session. I mean, like 5 minutes before a session starts, like getting present to what'd you come in with today? What are you saying to yourself today? What's some of your, what's some of the narrative going on for you at this moment in this session? Kind of getting present to those things and then helping them kind of make powerful choices around who they wanted to be in the session. And so it sounds kind of fluffy and like Buddhist or whatever, but what's really fun is when you actually can see a functional effect on a behavioral target. And we did discover those things. So we do a lot of mindfulness work in New York now. We're actually doing this with kids who are more challenged and on the spectrum. Kids who come during the day for school. We have them lead mindfulness exercises with each other, and it's been really awesome. Kids who have a tendency to have outbursts. Like I think about Megan's presentation where she was talking, where she showed that video clip of the kid kind of doing the breathing, showing what the behavior of calm versus the behavior of mad or angry. Similar things like that, where you have kids who tend to have some level of outburst or anger management issues, I would say, in sessions. just having them practice getting into a state of calm, and then also being able to like wrap language around what that is, has actually a really powerful effect on other behavioral classes. So yeah, it's been really awesome. So that was really Kendra and Donnie really kind of, brought that into our organization in a big way, and it's been really awesome.
Are you a behavior analyst who's interested in using acceptance and commitment training with your clients? Perhaps you work with high-functioning clients on the autism spectrum and you'd like to add an ACT approach to your treatment with this population. If so, then check out the Acceptance and Commitment Training for High-Functioning Autism workshop, which will be held on February 7th, 8th, and 9th, 2020 in Santa Ana, California. This will be led by Dr. Tom Sabo, Courtney Tarbox, and Kenzie Davidson. Attending this workshop will gain 30 Type 2 CEUs, including 3 ethics and 2 supervision credits. This workshop is being put on by my friends at Connections Behavior Planning and Intervention. In this workshop, you'll learn how to use ACT for individuals that max out on the VB map but continue to need help with social skills, romantic relationships, executive function, and other higher order skills. You'll develop fluency with key ACT strategies, including techniques for helping learners self-monitor and collect data on their use of ACT interventions. It will also focus on scope of practice, competence, plus the importance of ongoing training and supervision as they arise in the course of ABA ACT practice. Space is limited, and the price of this event goes up as we get closer to the dates. So you're going to want to get in on the ACT for High-Functioning Autism workshop as soon as possible. And to help defray costs, the folks at Connections are offering listeners a discount. So be sure to use the code podcast25 when you sign up. So for more information, go to connections-behavior.com/events or simply check out the show notes for this episode. Cool. Are you guys developing the mindfulness activities in-house? Are you following, one of Mark Dixon's curricula? Or how are you guys developing those activities?
So Kendra and Donnie have participated in, ACT workshops. They've done several, and then they've actually been co-participants in ACT workshops. It's really based on that. It's based on that actual ACT training and kind of what occurs in those workshops that Steve and his whole kind of crew put on. They put them on all over the country. So that's kind of where it comes from. But again, the way it's implemented and the way we measure it inside of its impact on other behaviors is very much a fit, precision teaching based thing. But it does come from kind of the ACT technology that's out there.
Got it. Very cool. Another thing I want to talk about is you brought this up, and I'm looking forward to getting more detail on it. You guys are starting a nonprofit, or maybe you already have. So can you fill us in on what that is and what the mission is?
So this is another kind of Kendra and Donnie contribution. So I can't, I have to think back. I think it might have been 4 or 5 years ago. Maybe that's too many. But Kendra and Donnie started a nonprofit in Reno. They actually had a client who, was a paying client, and their kid was transformed. And this client wanted to, this parent wanted to make these services available for kids who don't have money. And so basically approached Kendra and Donnie and was like, can I set up a scholarship? Like how, this is just amazing. I want this available for, I'd love for this to be available for impoverished kids. And we've been talking about doing nonprofit work for years. So it was kind of like it fell in their lap where they had like a benefactor. And so they were like, sure. And they started Empower Youth in Reno. And that's been for several years. And again, just producing unbelievable outcomes with low-income kids in the Reno area through Empower Youth. And so it's basically been like a pilot that they've been piloting this kind of nonprofit model in Reno, and it's been going so well. And so now we're working to make it a national nonprofit where we have chapters. And the goal is to really have, everywhere we have a for-profit fit learning, the goal is to have a nonprofit Empower Youth chapter. Because, again, in New York, we've been doing pro bono outreach work, forever. That's, to be quite honest, that's how we train and certify staff. So, we have a partnership with the Boys and Girls Clubs. And so we actually bring in Boys and Girls Club kids, or we've had kids in Harlem that, we do pro bono outreach services with at no charge. And then in the context of those services, they're paired up with a certified staff and then a person becoming certified. So that's how they, you can't certify a person if they're not working with a kid, but you also don't want to certify a person with a high-paying client. I mean, we're an expensive service. So it's kind of a perfect marriage. So we've always used Outreach Kids for that purpose, but it's never been a formally established nonprofit that would be functioning in that way. And so now that's the goal, is to have, wherever there's a Fit Learning Lab, there's an Empower Youth chapter where we're providing, outreach nonprofit services to low-income, at-risk kids, which is really exciting.
Yeah. Is any of this work going to be done in school settings where perhaps access might be easier?
Yeah. So, I think the structure really depends. Like that. So in New York, in my tri-state locations, in Locust Valley, we provide outreach services at the Boys and Girls Club that's in the town over in Glen Cove. So we actually go there. And then we were doing the same thing in New York City up in Harlem at a school that the Columbia Teachers College school that's kind of affiliated with Columbia. We would go to that school and provide outreach services. So that's kind of the model, but what we're, Nick and I are really starting the first chapter in New York of Empower Youth. That's on our goal for 2021. And our goal is to actually have a location, which would be kind of in a centralized area, kind of between Long Island. We're thinking Queens, which is kind of between Long Island and New York City. So we can access kids from both those areas. So I think ideally we have a location, but I also think it could work in any model. Like if there's a school that's willing to have you come in, then that's great. And then you don't have to worry about transportation. So.
All right, cool. Another thing I wanted to ask you about is your upcoming book. And in fact, I think the last time we talked about it, the name was yet to be announced. Can we break some news here, or are you still going to keep that close to the vest?
I have a literary attorney who's still doing the deep dive on my using the title.
Okay.
So I'm not going to reveal that yet.
All right. So you don't want to. So just to make sure. So the purpose of that is to make sure you don't copy someone else's title inadvertently.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Something that's trademarked or something of that sort.
Okay. So title notwithstanding, what is the book about? What's the intended audience? What is the promise that the book intends to deliver on?
Right. So again, this is something that I've been, kind of working on and thinking about for years, and remarkably, I declared, it was really February of last year, I said, I'm writing the book. It's like one of those things you're like, when I'm 50, when I'm 53, like you said in yours, I think there's no right time to do something, take a risk.
It's never a perfect time. Yeah.
Never a perfect time. So what was great is I'm largely, overseeing locations in the tri-state area, but I've gotten a team to the point where I can actually have been able to fade myself out to some degree. So this is really the first year I've been able to ever take a sabbatical, which was remarkable. So I took a sabbatical in June and wrote the book. So the book is, it's really it's meant for people who are concerned with the state of education in America, which I would assume would be most citizens. So it's really a critical analysis of the educational crisis in the United States, which is significant. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is called the NAEP, or the Program of International Student Assessment, the PISA. Those are the two kind of broad-scale evaluations of student outcomes that are done on a cyclical basis. The new data for 2019 for the NAEP are being released next week, actually, on the 30th. They're done every couple years. But so, for the dawn of the NAEP, for decades, more than 60% of American school children graduate below proficiency. I let that sit there. That's 60% of American school children are below proficiency in all academic areas that are assessed on the NAEP. And over 80% of minority and at-risk children graduate below proficiency. That is a national crisis that no one talks about. And all the school reformers do the same thing, which is all policy level work, which is like, privatization and charter schools and vouchers and, teacher accountability and all of those things that are at the policy level. But the common theme is, our educational outcomes are abysmal because teaching practices are ineffective. And again, just like what I talked about in my presentation inside of inductive science, where starting from the bottom up, school reform has to start from the bottom up. You can't hold teachers accountable when teachers aren't trained to be effective. Like, it's absurd. It'd be like not training surgeons in medical science and then holding them accountable for deaths. That's absurd. So teachers are trained based on magic and myths and traditions and ideology, and not on the science of human behavior, which is why schools fail. And it's why they always have failed. So in the book, I've spent a lot of time on a historical analysis of the rise of public education in this country and what that's based on. And how for 80 years of, we've been able to evaluate student outcomes on achievement tests for 80 years. The first broad scale study of student outcomes in the country was done in the 1940s. And never once has our country produced a majority of kids at at proficient levels. Never. Our schools have never been effective. Like, people talk about, back in the 60s when education worked. No, education's never worked for the masses. It has never worked. And it's never worked because it's never been guided by science. Education is based on beliefs and traditions. It's like a religious institution or politics. It's not a science. And so as a function, it doesn't work. So in the book, there's a pretty extensive historical analysis of that and really an analysis of ideology as really the guiding framework for all the establishments, to be quite honest, that have really led to this problem: the psychological establishment, the medical establishment, the educational establishment, and so forth, and how our access to change comes from science being integrated into educational practice, and more importantly, integrated into teacher training programs. And to be quite honest, there's two major victims of this, and students are obviously the more obvious one, but teachers are profound victims of our educational crisis. They are poorly trained and then thrown under the bus. When kids fail, it's either personal assaults on the teacher or it's medicalization of learning problems with the child. Those are the two options. It's like when kids fail, it's either the teacher's fault or something's wrong with the kid. And not that's how it's always been, which is why we always fail. So it's really about where that comes from. And then I talk about the technology of teaching. I mean, that's the whole point. There is a technology of teaching that we have had access to since the 1960s, and now I use Fit Learning as a wide example in the book about how we do the technology of teaching, but it's not about, Fit Learning. It's about this can be implemented in classrooms, and this is what the technology is, and where it comes from. So it's, there's a chapter on the natural science of behavior. There's a chapter on the technology of teaching, but I did write it for a mainstream audience. I mean, it's a popular press book, with the hope that, what Skinner tried to do with his publication of Technology of Teaching, I tried to write it in a way that is appealing to the masses. Although I have to address our science, I do think I write it in a way that is consumable for the layperson. And I write it with a lot of passion and anger and urgency, and I think that is good. So we'll see.
Are you ready to make the leap from pen and paper into the digital world? Do you spend hours taking notes, tracking data, figuring out schedules, and even worse, dealing with insurance billing? Or are you frustrated by your current system? Well, I recommend you check out Go Lotus. Go Lotus was created by a product development expert who spent years building systems for Apple and Microsoft before her child was diagnosed with autism and everything changed. She created Go Lotus with one mission in mind: to create a platform that could help therapists better treat their kiddos by providing a tool that allows them to focus on the actual work, not the paperwork. Go Lotus is an intuitive, easy to use, and dare I say, beautiful system. It handles every aspect of practice management, from data tracking and automatic SOAP notes to scheduling and billing. They even offer a white glove in-house billing service if you want billing fully managed outside your clinic. It's so simple, your entire team can be up and running in less than an hour. For more information, go to golotus.com/register for a free demo. And if you do sign up, tell them I sent you, or just use the coupon MATT2019 and you'll get 25% off the first 3 months. They're so confident that you will love their system that they allow you to cancel at any time. There's no risk and no commitment required. So again, if you want more info, head on over to golotus.com/register.
Hopefully.
All right. Well, I can't wait for the title reveal, and I can't wait for it to be available. So, and the lengths taken to disseminate in that context, I think, will be very helpful. So, again, I look forward to checking it out. I also want to mention that more than happy to take some audience questions. I've got a couple questions I want to get through, or another question or two, and then we can open it up to the audience, just in the spirit of using reinforcement. So anyone who comes up can get a behavioral observation sticker. I've used drink tickets for an open bar in the past. I don't know. So we might have like an indirect preference. Obviously, two different groups. But anyway, anything to generate or incentivize participation here. But a question that I definitely want to talk about. In your talk that you just concluded, you had some criticism about the structural nature of the credentialing of behavior analysts. Let's pretend you had the magic wand and you could wave your magic wand and make the credentialing process any way you liked. Obviously, you spoke about functional competence and things along those lines. So talk about how you would change the credentialing process if you were omnipowerful or whatever the term is for some period of time enough to make those changes. Right. Well, what would you like to see different?
Yeah, and I mean, I know I cast a wide net in that presentation on those issues. So, I mean, I think there's multiple concerns. So one is vocational training versus intellectual training. And I have grave concerns about that. And there's a rampant anti-intellectualism. This is something I do write about in my book. There's kind of a rampant anti-intellectualism in our society as a whole. A kind of a distrust of science, a disregard of scientific facts. I mean, we have a political administration that completely disregards scientific facts. I mean, a lot of the time, and it's just all over our society. So the concern I have is that certification is becoming more and more simply a vocational activity rather than an intellectual one. I just actually have a gal that works for me who sat and took her exam, and I was talking to her afterwards, and she told me there was not a single graph on the exam, not one. There were only vignettes, narratives, kind of like if-then vignettes. And I'll tell you right now, that's exactly what's on teaching certification exams. It's all narratives and vignettes. And what horrifies me is that, we should be training our practitioners as scientists, right? I mean, they need intellectual training as scientists. I understand that you're getting a professional credential to go and be an applied practitioner, but that doesn't mean you're not acting as a scientist. That's what a behavior analyst is. That's the analysis. Yet on our credentialing exam, there is no analysis, let alone standard measurement-based analysis. There's not even stretch to fill graph analysis anymore. Not that I liked that either, but no one is being required to interpret data. That really scares me, which means we're training BCBAs like teachers are trained. And we are the people that are poised to fix the way education goes and make teaching effective. But if we're training our applied branch in the same way that teachers are being trained, how are we going to fix it? We can't. So just because we understand the principles we can memorize flashcards and answer questions on an exam about the principles. If we can't engage in effective analysis of behavior, measure, using measurement, then I really fear what's happening. So I would suggest, my magic wand would be
That's
that.
right. Here's the magic wand. Pen is the wand.
My magic wand is that our practitioners are trained intellectually to think like scientists, like to understand what that is, like the difference. When you're trained to think of as a scientist, that changes everything. So that's my one issue inside of that level. And the other would be, I understand there's content issues inside of competency, but then when you're dealing with a applied field, then you actually have, provider behavior-based competency. So there's kind of like knowing about the field and being an expert in that, but then there's also knowing how to impact meaningful change with a client. And that's another thing that concerns me, is that, since it's so structural in nature, 1,500 supervised hours, and we're just trusting that the supervisors who are signing off feel confident in their competency. But as I mentioned in my talk, since we can't operationally define what effective treatment is, and we definitely can't measure it as a field, we can, like people who use standard measurement and like at Fit Learning, that's all we do. But as a field, it's not in our ethics code. It's not operationally defined, and a measurable, meaningful change isn't operationally defined. So how do we know that those 1,500 hours have actually produced someone who can make a meaningful impact on a client and provide effective treatment? I think those are really two major problems. Functional competency is not difficult. That occurs at the supervisor level. I mean, before a few years ago, there wasn't even standards of competency for supervisors. Now we have those, but again, those standards have nothing to do with ensuring that your supervisees are producing effective outcomes with clients. They're still very structural in nature. You wrote a book on this, right? Yeah. So I still think that, I understand the exam is one thing, and I definitely think more intellectual scientific analysis should be occurring inside of that exam. But at the supervised, clinical experience level, the supervisors should be trained to evaluate functional competency with their trainees and actually provide data to the board on that. And if everyone was measuring behavior the same way, which we should be, then that would be easy to do. We would, you could share your supervisees' standard acceleration charts on their levels of competency on the essential elements of instruction that have been defined, and then the charts on the behaviors of the clients that they've changed. That data could be provided to the board as part of their certification, rather than just signing off on these sheets of hours. How about providing some data on how effective these people are? I mean, aren't we behavioral scientists? I mean, shouldn't we be maybe showing some data inside of our supervision? That would be my magic wand.
Okay. All right. One more question, then we'll get to audience questions. So you, in your talk earlier, talked about how you, after 20 some odd years, are now not certified in any way, shape, or form as a behavior analyst.
Yeah, I haven't announced that yet, so here we go. It's out there.
Oh.
Well, I announced it today, but it's a very new thing for me.
This is just between us, right?
Yeah.
Was that hard for you to let it go?
Oh, man.
Talk about that.
Yeah, it was it's devastating. I'm devastated. And I resisted. I tried to not walk away for a long time, but as I mentioned in my talk, the state of affairs in New York is tragic. When the licensing regulation is passed that narrows the scope of practice to a specific population of children, only children with autism and related disorders, and you cannot do behavior analysis otherwise, you can't, there's no option. And so, I work with mainstream neurotypical learners in very advanced academic areas. And so the professionalization of the field led me to have to leave it. And that was heartbreaking because, again, I've been a board certified behavior analyst since very early on in Florida when I was got the undergrad one in the beginning of time. So it was hard for me, and I lost a lot of sleep over that.
So theoretically, could you have maintained your BCBA-D credential and just not been licensed?
I could have.
Okay.
But to be quite honest, it started to feel like it's so irrelevant for me. I hate to say that. But if you look at the task list, it's an autism credential. And nothing on the task list has anything to do with the kind of science I do. The dimensional units of behavior and standard measurement, those kind of scientific practices that's all we do every day at FIT. I mean, that's why I said during my presentation, we actually, we do applied natural behavior science. It's almost kind of like a new thing where, that's why we've created our own certification at FIT. I mean, we have our own certification. Because again, I don't hire BCBAs. If BCBAs come to work for us, they get certified at FIT. Like they have to go through the same certification as everybody else because their certification is not really relevant to what we do. So it started to feel like, why am I doing this when I actually feel like the credential is almost trying to work against the science I practice.
Do you think that law, I'm asking to speculate here perhaps, but was also written so specifically and outlined just that population that behavior analysts can serve? I know sometimes different service providers will try to protect their turf. Was there some of that going on too?
Oh, I'm sure.
Psychologists and other perhaps professional groups who have long-standing lobbying and constituency groups and things like that within the state.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, again, I wasn't involved. I was highly involved in the licensing regs for Nevada before I moved in 2010. But I moved to New York and I just wasn't involved in that. So I'm not quite sure why it became such a mess. But I do know that we're at risk of that because, for all due respect to Autism Speaks and those kinds of, that vehicle for, that mantra, like, let's just get and I get it. Like, I understand the importance of the insurance provision for kids with autism, but I do think it can start becoming quite narrow-sighted and almost like blind spots around doing anything it takes to get that mandate passed without regard to the implications it has for the field as a whole. It's tunnel vision, and it really concerns me. I feel like if the BACB was concerned about ensuring that professionalization was relevant to the application of behavioral science at large, that task list wouldn't look the way it does. But it does. It is an autism, developmental disability certificate, credential. And that's tragic. If we want behavioral science to be recognized professionally in all areas, then that task list should be relevant to all areas, and it's not. So I don't know. There's a lot of blind spots, I think, that happen, and I'm not sure how it went so haywire in New York, but it is haywire in New York.
Yeah, I've heard other reports of it from people who I've been acquainted with. So, all right. So who's up for some audience questions? Why don't you just come up to the stage? We'll hand you the mic, and we'll go from there.
Are you in need of continuing education? Well, Behavior University is a BACB-approved continuing ed provider, and their mission is to provide university-quality courses and ABA for new and experienced professionals alike. Their live webinars generally have a limited number of attendees so that the learning experience is highly interactive. And if you can't make the live events, these webinars are recorded and available in Behavior University's CEU library for later viewing. Behavior University also has a 40-hour RBT training. This self-paced course uses a combination of visual presentation, audio lectures, and live video models to teach all areas of the RBT task list. The course is accessible anytime and from anywhere. So if you'd like to learn more, head on over to behavioruniversity.com/observations, where you'll find a 10% discount for podcast listeners. Again, that's behavioruniversity.com/observations, and thanks for checking them out.
I'll go first. I'm Kelly St. Clair from Tate Behavioral. Can you talk a little bit about the types of reinforcement systems that your coaches are using during session? Because the learners obviously have to be really productive, and I'm just wondering what strategies are being used to help with that.
So, our kids are on token economies. All of our kids are, and we use points, right? So we actually use golf counters, right? Like we all know as behavior analysts. But so our coaches have counters to count behavior, and our kids have counters for points, which is super awesome and fast, because when they, hit various requirements in sessions, they beat their personal best on we have PBs at FIT, which is our big kind of reinforcement schedule. It's basically beat your best score, hit your personal best. And so when kids hit personal best, they get a certain number of clicks on their clicker, and they can do it really fast, and it's awesome and super efficient. When they hit the fluency aim, there's a greater amount of points. When they hit phase 1 mastery, there's a greater amount of points, and when they pass programs. So it's all kind of differential reinforcement based on very specific parameters of performance, but it's all on those golf counters, so it goes really quick. And then they love it because they can, they see it on the dial, and then more often than not, kids save up for big prizes. They'll put their points in a bank and save them for something big. Because remember, we're working with neurotypical mainstream kids after school most of the time. Now we do have kids during the day that might have more challenges, but very quickly we get them on those point systems, and it's similar. Some kids are exchanging points for escape or other things initially before they're into other reinforcers, but more often than not, they're on some kind of token economy. A lot of our adolescent and teenage kids, we contract with families, and they actually earn screen time. So their points are exchangeable for screen time minutes. Some kids just want cash. I'm not kidding. Like some kids earn points and they get a $20 bill. It depends on the kid. But they all are on those they're on those golf clickers, man. And it's awesome. They're just such an easy, quick way to bank points.
Any other audience questions?
Oh, I got a sticker. Ooh. All right, Ryan O'Donnell, behavior analyst. I'm curious. I was interested in the historical discussions around certifying people versus procedures. So I'm just curious, what are some of the things that you guys are looking at, and when you're looking for those certification of your practitioners?
You mean inside of our competency standards?
Yes.
Yeah. So again, luckily this came from science, which is, like I said in my presentation, our certification model is based on my dissertation, which I had the privilege of working on with Lindsley. I think one of the most important things about our functional level of competency is, number one, we use dimensional units of behavior to certify our staff. So we're measuring dimensional units of behavior with staff, just like we're measuring dimensional units of behavior with learners. It's no different. Where, unfortunately, I think in a lot of behavior analytic practices, you may not be using dimensional units of behavior for either, which is a no-no, by the way. But you may be using dimensional units with your learners, but then something completely different for your staff, like a narrative. I've seen a lot of that, just kind of a qualitative narrative thing, or percent correct, or a rubric. But remember, behavior is behavior, and staff are learners, right? When we're training teams, we're training people, they're learners. And so we should be using the most sensitive, fundamental unit of behavior, or sensitive measure of behavior as we're certifying staff, as we are when we're training kids. So I think one of the most awesome things that came out of my DIS was developing a model for using dimensional units of behavior, which is rate of correct instructional behaviors per minute, and duration of time spent in active timings with kids where they're actually practicing. We know those are the two fundamental functional elements for producing amazing outcomes: is how engaged are you with your learners, how frequently are you engaging in effective instruction, and how frequently are the kids behaving, right, and learning and practicing and receiving reinforcement. So obviously those are the two fundamental measures, which is so exciting because those are time-based. Those are dimensional. So using rate of response and duration for coaches in certification, as we do with learners, is huge. I think it's also understanding how to operationally define behavior in that way so that it can be measured in that way. The fact that we measure not only dimensional units, but we look at them on standard acceleration charts for staff, just like we do for kids. I think that's huge, because then you can actually see functional relations between a coach's behavior and a learner's behavior, because you're using the same tool. So you can actually make those discoveries. That's the only way we discover. We didn't just, we didn't pull 20 per minute correct instructional behaviors, out of the air. We actually discovered that by doing those comparisons. We found that to be what was a masterful rate for coaches. Just like we found the, 20 minutes of practice timings, as the functional rate for coaches and kids. So, it was done through applied natural science, not arbitrary. So that's my fear, is that not only are we using arbitrary mastery criteria in our field with kids, we're also using them with staff, rather than looking at what is functionally mastered at both levels. And we have a science that lets us make those discoveries and understand that. And that, using dimensional units of behavior and a standard, the standard acceleration chart, a standard measurement tool, allows you to make those discoveries around function at all levels. So.
All right, very good.
Deciding to take the next step in your career is a big decision. Whether it's moving from a registered behavioral technician to a board-certified behavior analyst, or learning how to apply behavior analysis within a school setting, the University of Cincinnati online behavior analysis program can be a rewarding way to advance your career. Gain cutting-edge marketability, knowledge, and skills to increase your earning potential, all while improving the quality of life for others. The University of Cincinnati, a premier research and higher learning institution, ranks in the top tier of America's best colleges by U.S. News & World Report, and it's fully accredited through the Higher Learning Commission. So if this sounds interesting to you, please visit behavioranalysisuc.online for more information.
Hi, Kim. Hi. It's Megan, behavior analyst, Megan Miller. So we talked a little bit at lunch about this already, but I have to get my question answered. So obviously with Fit Learning, you all have developed an amazing system to really help the more advanced learners. And you talked a lot about how right now it seems like the BACB is more focused on autism treatment, but I'm going to bring it around to autism. Yeah. So a lot of the learners that I work with right now, they don't have advanced language, but they still really need a lot in terms of component composite analysis and fluency building, and people don't have the skill sets to address that. And there's also an assumption, especially for learners who don't have a lot of vocal language, that cognitively they can't perform. So I was wondering if you see a vision in the future of maybe taking the systems, especially with the assessment process and the application tests and everything that FIT has created, and kind of tapping in not necessarily autism, but more into that population of people who may have whatever, like CP or different, things that are interfering with higher language level or more advanced learning.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, there's a lot of people who do, Kelly Ferris, in Seattle. I mean, there's a lot of really profoundly amazing practitioners who use precision teaching but more importantly, standard measurement to work in EIBI, do early intervention for kids with autism with this model. So those people are out there. But I will say, what I think is, I don't necessarily know if FIT's going to, do EIBI. I would say, no, we're not going to do that. But I would say, we're actually developing a scientist educator workshop series. This is another thing I forgot to mention, which is new at Fit Learning.
Oh, let's hear about it.
And Donnie would kill me. He's like, don't forget to mention the scientist educator series. Sorry, Donnie. I'm mentioning it now. So, because we have our certification that we do for Fit Learning, and that's unfortunately, when you run a business, we have intellectual property, right? That's just our intellectual property. We got to think about, right? So that's one thing. However, there's also this new workshop series that we haven't set the date for the first one, but we're hoping early 2020, where anyone can come to these workshops we put on to learn how to be scientist educators, which means it's more about starting to think like scientists. Number one, how to measure everything using dimensional units of behavior in the standard acceleration chart, period. I don't care what you're training. I don't care if you're teaching toileting, hand washing, self-care skills, early fine motor skills, gross motor imitation, matching, whatever it may be, giving people a generative repertoire around how to design everything based on your measurement system and not the other way around. How to start thinking about your measurement system as guiding everything you do, and then how to design programming around your measurement system, not your measurement around your programming. So that's going to be one major theme in all of the scientist educator workshops we do, is going to be teaching people to think like scientists, number one, around measurement. Number two, there's actually, and we've shown this with our really complicated, and you're right, Meg, I mean, we do very high level complicated stuff. But it doesn't matter, because component composite analyses is a generative repertoire. It's a generalized operant class if you teach it the right way. It's getting people to really think about what is your composite behavior you're trying. What's your end target, and then what are all of the component skills essential for that to move to, like shaping, right? What are the successive approximations to get to that bigger skill, right? And so then if you're measuring behavior in this way, then how can you design your curriculum based on a really effective component composite analysis and then this very fundamental way of measuring behavior based in natural science? And so our Scientist Educator Workshop series is really going to be designed for any practitioner to learn those kind of generative skills. So it's not like fit learning IP and doing the fit learning method and the fit learning model. It's about thinking like scientists in applied settings and doing really great component composite analyses, because we really are good instructional designers. I mean, I will say, when one thing that happens to you when you choose to do academic work and you're a behavior analyst, which means you get none of that training in your graduate training. Like, I didn't take any classes on reading. I'll be honest with you. Like, I didn't take any of that. Like, I had to literally learn that myself. I mean, I read everything you could. I studied reading behavior. I studied math behavior. I studied logical problem solving, with a lot of guidance and mentorship from a lot of really amazing humans in the field. But so, but one thing that happens to you when you start designing, designing curriculum of this level, is that you become really good at instructional design. Because, when you're thinking about getting algebra as your composite skill, doing a component analysis of algebra, which is crazy fun and amazing, that's no different than doing a component analysis of a gross motor imitation repertoire, really, or more, getting kids engaging in the core which I think is hugely important, deriving relations. What are the core component operants to get kids deriving relations, which is really critical for advancing language, so that you can start shaping up sophisticated language repertoires with really, very low verbal kids. So that's something we are doing, and we're hopefully we'll have a date for our first one, in the spring of 2020, where we're really providing more just training on these more generative repertoires for practitioners, just being better scientists and better instructional designers for anything. So that is something we're going to be doing. So we're not going to be developing an EIBI curriculum, but we are developing a Scientist Educator Workshop series.
So someone could, as an outcome of participating in that, set up their own system of intervening using these types of instructional and measurement methodologies.
And another part of it I would mention that will be included, so obviously measurement is huge, component composite analyses, which is really instructional design, and then assessment. So, that is so important. And here's what I want to say. Like I said in my presentation, the assessment that we use at FIT nothing existed. When we were in the broom closet, there was nothing that allowed you to pinpoint academic repertoires, like component skills, according to dimensional units of behavior, like rate or duration. Nothing existed. It was nothing I could buy on the market. So what did and by the way, I didn't know anything. I was an idiot in so many ways. But I just kind of start logically thinking. I did some component composite analyses of like reading repertoires, and I'm like, okay, well, it looks like if kids are going to be able to read words, they really should be able to just sound. And also, I'd read a ton of stuff on literacy and linguistics and direct instruction reading and all of these things. So it was basically like, okay, how do I get an understanding of a child's baseline component skill repertoire according to rate of response? So all I did was an instructional design around breaking down as finite as I could all the component skills in a reading repertoire. And then what did I do? I took snapshots of kids performing those skills and measured them as rate of response. And then I looked at their rate of responses. And, based on precision teaching, and then, we've evolved for 20 years, we now know kind of what functional aims are, comparing what their baseline rates were on what they should be. And then we designed programming around those assessments. And now that has become our benchmark assessment that we run every 40 hours, where we look at everything every 40 hours. And because of that, and comparing that with more standardized assessments, we have validated an assessment that didn't exist before. And now it's like a really valid assessment. School districts, they take it very seriously now because we've done that. But all we do is measure component skills according to rate of response. So like any behavior analyst can look at, do you know how there's so many behavioral assessments that need to be developed in every curriculum area for kids with autism. Based on rate. Really. Like, when a kid starts coming into an autism intervention, what I would love to see is kids getting just a baseline of what's their rate of response on these gross motor imitation targets, this receptive labeling, these tacks, whatever, according to rate. And then what's cool is if you do an entire scope and sequence of all the components you want a kid to have, and you look at all of those every 40 hours, you start seeing really cool functional relations like, well, we've only targeted these and achieved, fluency on these, but all of these move too. That's how we started discovering like generativity and things like that. So a part of the Scientist Educator series is also like how to develop your own assessment tools that will allow you to pinpoint skills. And then also powerfully communicate those to providers and parents, and how to link those up with like standardized assessments so that you can validate your own methods. Because to be quite honest, there's nothing more valid than directly observing behavior and measuring it as rate of response. We don't need to have an argument on that. Like that is empirically validated. Directly observe a behavior, time it, and count it. And then compare after you provide 40 hours of service or whatever your benchmark is, now what's it look like? Right? That's it. So in that workshop series, it's also going to be about like how do you assessing behavior in a way that allows you to stay true to our natural science inside of the dimensions you're using. So
I'm imagining once this podcast gets published, I'm going to get flooded with emails about, hey, where do I find this or whatever. So is that something like that will be announced on like the Fit Learning Facebook page or something like that?
Yeah. So Kendra, Donnie, and Nick and I we have a retreat the week of IPTC, which is the International Precision Teaching Conference. And it's not full yet, so if people still want to register, you should, because it's in St. Pete, Florida, which is beautiful, and it's on November 8th. So we're having a retreat a few days before that where we're hashing all this out, and hopefully we're going to set a date. So once that's all established, we'll make an announcement about where the first one's going to be held and what the date and how to register and those kinds of things. So we're hopefully going to have that hashed out that first week of November.
Okay. We're coming up on time here in about 10 minutes or so. If there are other listener questions, just come up to the stage. And while we got one. Okay, come on up. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Sarah LaChance. I work for Tate Behavioral. My question is you spoke a lot about what we need to do and what regular educators are lacking, and us, working in the ABA world, we all know that that's important. We all know that behavior is important. But I'm more wondering about how can we go about making it widespread for, regular educators and everything to have that mindset of that looking at behavior and the success of students is important.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? That's why I wrote the book. I do think one of the important things is no one really knows about us, which is a problem. So I think, more often than not, when teachers hear about this or see these results or see what we're doing with kids, they are literally amazed and like, how do I do that, right? They want that information. So I think inside of impacting the mainstream, it's really disseminating to the public in a big way, which is why I wrote the Popular Press book. I agree with Matt inside of attending different kinds of conferences. I have to say I'm not great at that yet. I haven't been doing that enough. And that's something that really we should be doing more of, is attending reading conferences and typical education conferences. So I do think, they don't even know we're here. And then I also think it's those that do know we're here are, scared or don't understand us. Again, because of how we talk differently and we focus on different things, which is why I focus so much on the book, in the book on the problems. Most people really do believe, like, for instance, I spend a lot of time in the book on neuropsychology, neuropsychological assessments. There's a real belief by teachers and neuropsychologists and the mainstream psychological establishment that psychological tests actually measure neurology. Like, it's in the title. Like, a neuropsychological evaluation implies that they're measuring neurology. They are not. They're measuring behavior and inferring neurology. It's an inference. It's a theory. Like a kid performs a certain way on a battery of tests, and then a psychologist makes an inference about why they performed that way. And their inference is always about neurological dysfunction. But they have never directly measured neurological dysfunction, never. All they've measured is behavior on a test. And so I think what's really important is, as behavior analysts, for us to understand that ourselves and to powerfully communicate that every chance we get, which is debunking this stuff as every time we can. Because again, the fact that they're allowed to call themselves neuropsychologists implies that that's what they do. That's not what they do. They measure behavior and they infer neurology from it, which is an inference. Whereas there's many other explanations for why a kid performed poorly on a test. Mainly, they have skills deficits. They've never learned that stuff, right? So I know, for me, I write a lot for Popular Press. I have an article out in the 74 Million. I've written for Thrive Global. So I try to do a lot of Popular Press writing it's mainly on digital platforms where I do op-eds of various sorts, where I try to talk about this as much as I can. Because again, there's just such a profound misunderstanding by the psychological establishment themselves about what they're actually doing and measuring. And again, it's not like I'm always going to make friends. I definitely, some people get mad at me. But there's also people that have breakthroughs around like these distinctions that they didn't really have before, where they're like, well, so many parents that when I talk to a parent about what a psychological test really measures, you would think that it was like the most mind-blowing experience for them because they just have never heard this. So I think, the more and more we can be talking to the masses, like to the public, about what's really going on, is so important. So, that's why I don't do a lot of academic publishing, in journals. I'm kind of on the Og Lindsley camp on that, where I just don't feel like we necessarily need to be talking to ourselves. And also, we've been super marginalized in our field, and people who use standard measurement, the journals don't like us. So I don't spend my time there. I spend my time in Popular Press because, people need to know what's wrong and have those distinctions made, because you don't know what you don't know, right? You're blind. So it's like, it's us creating distinctions for people about what's really going on in the establishments that are dominating our culture.
Okay, very cool. I think we have time for one more question, and then we got to wrap up the day. I've got so there's a couple things I just wanted to get into. Maybe I'll try to roll two questions in one to conclude this. Is PT in a renaissance era right now? And where do you see fit learning in the next 5 to 10 years?
So I would say, yes, I think PT is in a renaissance, time, which is so exciting. And I think, Rick Cubina and Dave Stevens and what they did with Chartlytics is a major, reason for that. I think they've been heavily, I think they've done so much work, so it's been so amazing inside of how they've moved that forward by making that digital platform available. I also have to, humbly say Fit Learning is involved in that. I think the fact that we have 31 locations and, 1,500 kids going through a quarter and, so many people being trained and certified to do this, I think that has played a part. There are also a lot of amazing people out there doing this stuff, on a big scale, that I think is really moving, this in the right direction. I think there's more and more attention being brought to the measurement problems in the field, and Rick has made it so much easier to chart by providing that platform. So I do think that it is a renaissance time, and I think, I always think if AUG was alive today, I don't know if I said this in my last podcast with you, but one of the last conversations I ever had with AUG, I was starting to dream about franchising, like having Fit be like, like the Sylvan Learning Centers of the world, like a common household name, but where you get like this rather than like that. And AUG was always like so supportive and excited about the idea of it. He didn't really know how it would work or how we would accomplish it, but that was always his dream, that this was first of all, that this is just what behavior analysis was. Like, this is how everyone measured behavior in behavior analysis, like, period. Just like they did back in the early days when everyone was using cumulative records, and that's all you looked at ABA. He dreamed of that being the case for applied behavior analysis. But I think if he were alive today, I think about how proud he'd be. So.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
And where Fit Learning is, sorry, I always get emotional when we talk about AUG. And then where Fit Learning is going to be in, what'd you say, 5 years?
5-10 years, yeah.
So we're on acceleration to have, close to 100 labs in about 5 years, which is pretty crazy. So,
wow.
In 5 years, we'll have about 100 locations. We just did luckily we do our strategic planning sessions, so I kind of know these numbers. So we'll have about 100 locations in 5 years. If you do the math on how many kids that'll be, that's, going to be, in the tens of thousands a quarter, with, similar numbers of certified people doing this work. And then, what I really do also see is a lot more nonprofit chapters in a lot of states, so that, outreach services are being provided to kids who can't, afford to pay for these services. So that's what I see.
Very cool. Obviously, I want to thank you, Kim. You've been pulling double duty today.
Well, I'm like, people are probably like, could she please shut her pie hole? Like, I'm really
I
sick
don't
of hearing
think
her
so.
talk.
I think would have people asking questions into the evening here if we weren't. We're about out of time. We're going to wrap up so I also want to thank our hosts here, Tate Behavioral. I'd like to give everyone a round of applause for coming out. Thank you so much. Thanks, guys, for inviting us to do this. It's been great fun.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Cicoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.